Hello, it's Victoria from Coastal Themes, and in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how you can make a portfolio website from scratch on Framer in a day. And what I'm going to be doing in this video is showing you how to make the front page of your portfolio site. So I've found two sites from Dribbble, and they're both built on Framer of two epic designers who've obviously built their site so creatively on Framer. And if I refresh this page, you'll see how animation comes in. Kind of everything's animated on hover. Even this little kind of sign here, this is hover. All these little elements. Everything moves, everything is very dynamic, but it's still very usable, and I like how the content is centered. And this girl, Daniela, is super talented, and I'm going to link everything in the description below, so we are fully crediting her for referencing our site and using it as inspiration. There are other pages. She does put all her work on her page, so definitely go take a look if you're into it. And then the other site I found is this guy called Daniel Sun, and I think it's super creative and super cool. Again, built on Framer, but you can see how he really goes and uses animation so well. So even here on hover, and these little arrows animate. Just things like this are really a great way to showcase all Framer's skills and Framer's best features. And yeah, same here. So creative, so epic, even down to the social icon. So it's really well thought out. So what I'm really liking from both of these sites are these curved kind of boxes, containers to showcase the work. So I think that's going to be an area I start with, and we'll do kind of the hero section last, and then we'll start building in some animation. So we might have to kind of find some royalty-free images online, because these are obviously custom to her, and same here. These are obviously all custom. I can imagine there was some like Midjourney use, some AI generation, or they might all be custom, who knows? But especially like these badges and things, they're giving Midjourney, they're giving AI, and that's super cool. Okay, so jumping into Framer, I've started a new project. I've called it Portfolio, and I've got a desktop. I'm going to add a phone breakpoint. I'm not going to be doing tablet just for the sake of this video. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and just add a layout onto the page. So I've added a layout top to bottom, gap 0. So now when I add a new section, it will snap to the top, and I can fill it to the width. So I want to add some grids to the page. This is something we haven't really covered in a previous tutorial, but something that you should know how to do. So the center content I would like to be centered from the right about, we'll start with 96, and then we're going to drop in a container, and that's, let's see, that's it. So actually let's make this a bit bigger. Okay, so I think that's pretty good for me. And then the height, we can actually now fit the content. So now we've got this. We'll build the header in later. And I'm going to start building in this kind of grid layout, which I'm really liking from these guys. So it's kind of like a masonry grid. So I'm going to put this section into a stack these, and same here. So let's just start by creating another frame. And I'm going to give the gap in the container 16. So let's swap these. So let me fill these so you can see what's happening. So I'll make them light grey. So this one I'm going to leave as is. So I'm going to add a border radius of about, let's 16, maybe a bit more, 24. And then this one is actually going to have containers inside. So I'm going to stack this one with the same gap of 16. I'm going to remove this fill and add a container inside. And we'll make the width fill, duplicate it, and height fill. So now we can kind of play around with the height. Make sure this fills the space, and then the containers inside will also fill the space. And then we'll add those border radius. Okay, cool. So now we have this masonry grid, and what we can do is duplicate this. We'll actually group these, so this will be the whole kind of masonry grid area. And we can flip this around. So now we kind of have the same kind of vibe. I'm pretty sure her grid is probably a bit more accurate, but now we can start filling it with what we want. So I'm going to call that the start of my wireframe. We can ignore mobile for now. We'll tackle that later. And I'm going to work with adding a heading. So now I've got this whole stack with 2 grids inside. So let's just rename these and call this works. And then I want to add a heading above. So what I would normally do when creating a new site, I would create text styles and color styles just to put that in. But because we're kind of designing as we go, I'm not going to be putting it in. We're going to set the width to fit and the height to fit, and then we're going to drag it in here. So now we've got this here. And then this is when I want to add padding, top and bottom. So top, I'm going to add about 48, and bottom 48. And then I want to make this bigger, obviously it's quite small. So this is going to be kind of an H2 on the page, heading 2. So if my H1 is about 48, I want my H2 to be about maybe 40 or 32 is probably safer just for this screen size. Cool. And if I wanted to add a subheading, I could do that too. So again, we're just dropping in the text as we go. Subheading, I'm going to make about 20 pixels, and let me go pull in some just GPT generated text to make it look a bit more realistic. Okay, so now I have this, and I want to make sure it's center aligned. I'm actually going to stack this. And making sure that, see, I've got my right and left margins on these grid sections, but I actually might remove these, make it full width, and add it to the whole stack. So 192 and 192, and make sure that this is set to fill. So now everything has this margin on the left and the right. I want to make sure that my text width is filling, and I might even make this a little bit smaller. Even here, this could benefit with some margin left and right. So just like playing around with this spacing to get it to how we like it. So now we have this masonry grid, and what I do want to do is group the grids and make sure that the gap in between is 16. So now we have 16 between here, 16 between here, 16 between here, here, and here. So it's all 16, and then between the sections we have 32. On the left and right we have 192, and the top and the bottom we have 48. So again, ignore mobile, it is not done. But we can make it look a little bit friendlier by doing so. Okay. So that is kind of this section which we like. She's left aligned, but yeah, we're not copying it directly. I quite like this kind of script text, and this is a great example of absolute positioning. So we're gonna kind of use this and show you how you can start putting that in. So I'm gonna duplicate this. And I'm gonna find a nice script text. Something that's not tacky, which is always quite difficult when you start looking at script texts and handwritten styles. They can get a bit unreadable. Okay, so I've settled on this font, Ooh Baby, and this is actually as thick as I can get it, which is fine for now. We're going to change the color. We're going to bring in maybe a dark blue, actually. So now we have this piece of text. Obviously, it's sitting relative to the container. Let's make the width and the height fit the content. And I'm going to change the positioning to be absolute. And now this is absolute with reference to this heading section. So now I can drag it wherever I like. And I actually want it to sit out of the section. So what I'm going to do is click on the layer, drag it up, and now I can put it wherever I'd like. I can center it above, but kind of defeats the point. I can put it here. And it's getting tricky just because we're working in the limitations. So I'm going to add a container above, and that's going to be the hero container anyway. So now we've got this text. And that means that it is 667 pixels away from the left and 13 pixels from the top. I'm actually going to put it back, make sure that the overflow is visible, and that means it is relative to this container. So what I'm actually going to do is I pulled in these scribbles, and I think this is just a quick way to get arrows. And so I'm going to pull this arrow into this container. Again, add a frame, make sure it's absolute. We want to scale this down, so I'm going to hit K, scale this down, and pull this over here. Scale it down again. And I'm going to group all of this. So this frame and this frame, we're going to group to arrow. Arrow plus text. And then this whole thing is going to be absolute. So now we can move this as we wish. And I'm just going to change the color of that arrow to match the text, more or less. So now we have this, and it kind of moves, but we can refine that later. So we have this arrow and this text, and then our containers. So I'm going to populate some content in this container with some work, and we'll come back and see. So I've made this section a stack by applying layout top to bottom with padding all around at 32 pixels. And then I've put in a heading of my first project. I'm actually going to decrease the size of this to be about 24. And then I'll take the same text styling here, left align it. And I'm going to put a subheading. And then I'm going to group these. So a lot of building your page just comes down to grouping things and making sure they're grouped correctly so you get the spacing you want. Even here, this is quite big. We'll make that 15. And then I'm going to pull in an image. So I've got this image 14, and that's been uploaded. So let's copy it, paste it inside. And now we have this image. It's sitting in line, and I want it to sit absolutely. And now we can kind of start looking at the styling of these blocks. So I want it to be just off-white, and I want the shadow to be fairly blurred, and I want it to be really, really quite light, so maybe a 10% opacity on the colour of the shadow. And we want to make sure that this container holding the grid items is set to overflow visible. Same with the entire grid section, overflow visible. That will make sure that the shadows kind of overflow out of the space. Okay, now it's super subtle, but I'm quite liking it. So then, looking at this, I want to see if I can kind of add an animation. So it's going to be kind of a scroll in animation or a hover animation, one of the two. So I'm going to go to effects, and I'm going to do a hover effect actually. And it will default apply the scale effect, which I don't want. I would like to rotate it. It gives it more of a quirky look. So now if I played this, it's so subtle. It's kind of cute. And then we can kind of add a shadow or add another screen over it. So I'm going to pull in another screen. So I've got this new screen and I'm going to come back into the block and it's hidden behind. I'm going to give it a Z index higher. So because everything is now absolutely positioned, you can play with Z indexes, which is your kind of layers, not your X coordinate, not your Y coordinate, but your Z coordinate, which is kind of your 3D coordinate. So I want the one behind to remain as 1, and I'll make this one Z index of 2, and that'll make sure that it's above. So I want this to kind of, on hover, the scale will stay 1. I'm going to change the offset. We're just going to change the placement of it. So on hover, it's not going to move all the way down, it's going to move 150 pixels down, and we can lower the opacity. It doesn't even have to move that far down, it can move 70 pixels down, and we can lower the opacity. So let's see how that works. Is that still quirky? Kind of. So we're going to stop there because we can waste so much time on this. But you can add obviously more complex animation. So I'm going to make this a little bit more fun. And it's already got that bounce, so I'm not going to be messing with that. And I think it's cute. It shows a bit of the design, and it gives you that vibe. I'm going to show you how this can be done. So what I'm going to do is go back into Framer. I'm going to get one of these little icons. So what you want to do is click on the illustration, wrap it in a frame. I'll rename that. And then we want to add an effect, and we want to add a hover animation once again. So what we want to do here is, again, this can stay the same. We want to rotate it pretty much 180. It's different with a smiley face because it has an upright position, but we could do it like 360 and then it goes in full circle. So let's see. Which is quite cute. So that's how these little flower illustrations are done, and she's got a bit of easing in and easing out. So if I go back and I click on the animation and I click on transition, we can ease in and ease out as we'd like. This is kind of a little bit of a science. So you can add the time the whole animation takes. You can add a delay, and then if we just preview it, and that's kind of easing in and easing out. So you can kind of play around with that setting to find what you like. As for this kind of color that floods the page, this is an illustration and an arrow. So the arrow animates out and the illustration and text animates in from the left-hand side. On this one, this is just a little jump and an animated arrow. So what we want to do is, let's actually create a header section, and I'm going to show you how we can make it responsive. So let's rename this header, and I'm going to make this a component called header, and I'm going to drop in a logo in the middle. I'm going to use my own name logo, very plain. Drop it in out there so we can drag it in. I'm going to make it quite small. We'll center align it. So if you wanted it to be center aligned, you could simply make a whole stack from left to right and have a menu item on the left and a menu item on the right and your logo in the middle. But if you want your logo on the left and your menu item on the right, then you make this whole thing have a left to right layout, and then you add a new frame, and you make sure that for the whole container the distribution is spaced between, and this will push it to the extreme. So that means we'll need to add a little bit of padding. I'm adding 24 pixels all around, and then I'll make sure that the height is fitting the content. So now we've got this container, which is perfect for adding our CTA and adding a menu. So I'm just going to pop in the menu items like this. They won't have any hover or anything yet. We'll make sure we're using the right font and the right color. I'm just going to default back to black. Obviously, if you're looking for like drop downs and things like that, you can watch one of our other tutorials. So let's leave it like this for now. Make sure that the spacing between is something workable. I might even make the spacing on the left and right bigger to match our grids. So now we have works, contact, and then logo. We'll want this to link to another page. So if I quickly create another page called works, which ultimately I would make a CMS page, then when I edit this, I can make sure it links to works, and that's actually given it a style of a link. So I would probably create a new link style and make sure it's just what I like. So now we've got this header. We've got a button that links to works, and a button that links to the homepage. So that is great. And then on mobile, I would default this to a burger menu. I would make this a lot smaller. I decrease the padding on the left and the right. I mean, you could make it work like this. You could even stack it. So let's move on to the hero section. And the hero section, I want to do a center aligned hero section. And we're going to use the same kind of text structure. Make sure that it's in the... There we go. So I've just added a layout to this hero. Let's rename this. And we'll make this, if we make this fill, we can remove this. We can add our padding. We're going to use the same padding. And then we want to make this an H1. So my H1, I want to make 48. Again, if you're using text styles, then keep using those. So now I've got my heading and some subtext. I want to add a CTA. So I'm going to show you how to make buttons. So what I'm going to do is get a frame, come in here, and before I even do anything, I'm just going to create a component and call it button. And I'm going to fill this with that blue. Not sure exactly, we'll make it a different blue. I'm going to add a little border radius, maybe like 4. Make sure that the layout is applied and pop some text inside. Width we're going to fit, height we're also going to fit. And then let's just make sure that text is white for visibility. And what you want to do is you want to make the height fit the content and the width fit the content, and then add your padding afterwards. So let's start with 24, and then we'll realize the right needs to be a bit bigger. The left needs to be a bit bigger. The bottom can be a bit smaller, maybe 16, and the top can be that. And then I'll make this text a variable, plain text. So when I take this component and I drop it in here, I can change this text on the fly. And that is how you do a basic component. So now looking at it, this button's actually really quite big. Let's just make sure that's all vibing. Okay, so I want to group this, which is already grouped. And that's kind of the basics: hero, subheading, and then button. So then when it comes to things like adding those illustrations on either side, if we look at this, these are a onload / on appear animation, and that just spins them. So I'm going to show you how that's done. And we're going to again use, let's use this. We'll absolute position this, wrap it in a frame. So right click, add frame, call it cloud, absolute position. Oh, and we'll move that across. So like you can even do things like, if we've got clouds, let's be a bit more creative. Let's not just copy Daniela, even though she's done it so well. If you've got clouds, okay, let's change the color of the clouds. Maybe we want it to be like a super light blue. We want to add an effect that's on appear. And we can kind of slide in. We can kind of make it whatever we want. So you can see the cloud kind of moved in. And then we can kind of slow that down and speed it up however we'd like. And that's what we can do with this time. You can also make it a scroll animation so that they move when they scroll. So that's just how you can start to like get your head around animations. Like, this is terribly done, but that's just, once you know the basics of doing on appear, so this is on appear, you can do like we did before, hover, press, loop, drag. So that's if you want those, there's some websites where you can drag the little elements around. So free form. So if we remove appear and we do drag, you can see you can drag them, and then you can also make sure that they don't snap back, so it's more of an item, and that just makes it a lot more fun. The last thing I want to show you is how to do a really basic moving carousel, and I'm going to get the carousel element, which you get by going to insert, and then I just search carousel, but you can find it by going down here to interactive and pulling in the carousel. And carousels are made by simply connecting the layers to the component. So I'm going to just make sure that the width is fill, and then I'm just going to duplicate this component and pull it out here. And then I'm going to show you that if I click on these 3 dots and drag it here, make sure that the height actually fits content, and then I'll duplicate it again just for the sake of showing you. Now there's 3 components inside here. I can decide how this goes. So if I want a scroll bar, if I want dots. So if I add a scroll bar, dots will show you that it's a carousel. If I want it to be fluid or snapping. So that is that's a carousel. And if it was 2 columns, let me just show you. Carousels don't move by themselves. So if I make it 2, they do scroll across. So carousels are manual. Tickers move by themselves. So we'll go to interactive, we'll go to ticker, and we'll make sure the width is fill and the height will connect the content and fit the height to the content. We'll drag this over, make the height, actually, not letting me today, make the height fit the content, there we go. We can adjust the speed, the direction, the sizing, if there's any clipping, and then hovering if it slows it down, so we can make it slow down to a stop when you hover. So now you'll see it moves. It's moving very, very fast, so we can adjust the speed here. We can make it move at 40%. And when you stop, you can see. And that is pretty much what is going on here. So yeah, that is where I'm going to stop today. But this is how you can start building your portfolio, and you can see how, I've been recording for 50 minutes. This video will be much shorter when you're watching it, but you can really start and finish a whole portfolio, at least the first page in a day or half a day, and get it to a point where it's very publishable. And that's just stacking all the skills that you can learn on the Coastal Themes YouTube and just across YouTube, and using also the Framer tutorials to get things to do what you want. There might be cases where you might need code, little code snippets to get custom animations, or maybe there's custom components you want to copy from other resources. you can kind of stack all these things to create a no-code website, a no-code portfolio in under a day, and that is the power of Framer. But I'm going to leave this with you. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if there's anything else you want to see. We can definitely refine this, bring in some of our own elements and more work, and make it more of a realistic page. And I want to again thank Daniela and Daniel. I just noticed that they have the same name, but Daniela and Daniel, for their epic portfolios. Again, linked below, go check it out. They've just done top-notch jobs on this, and it's a great example of how Framer should be used. If you are after some themes that you want to use straight out of the box, you can browse Coastal Themes on coastalthemes.com, and we have Framer themes, Ghost themes, and Webflow themes, and we have a range of very creative themes. Unlike this one here, there's no floating clouds in the themes you'll see, and we've got a cool range of themes for different things, for SaaS products, for agencies, for finance companies, and for portfolios. So take a look, see what you like, and they range in price, so have a look there. And if you are keen to get started using Framer, you can click the link in our description, and that will give you money off your first year of using Framer. It's such a great tool, so flexible, and you can design and build on the fly, and that is the power of Framer. So I will see you next time, and thanks for watching. Bye!